Okay, I think we'll get going here. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming out. My name is Layne Seward. I'm a senior wildlife biologist with the Alberta Conservation Association.
Yeah,
Everyone
I'm
knows it.
Nathan Stamp. We farm here at Enchant, and we rent all this land that's we're looking at today. So,
So we're just going to talk a little bit about the farm out here and what's going on and the partnership and what we're trying to do. So, a little background. So this farm, it's about 1,400 acres. About 970 is under irrigation. It's owned by a family from Calgary called the Haggins Family. It's farmed by Stamp Farms, and we formed a partnership. So there's the Haggins Family, Stamps, and our organization, Alberta Conservation Association. And we've all been kind of working together on this farm to trial some different enhancements and things out here. Stamps are farming the land, and Haggins are a conservation-minded family that wants to see some of the different things that can be done out here. They also are into hunting and fishing and stuff too, so they like to see that. So what we've done out here from our organization perspective is we've recognized that in Alberta there's about 30 million acres of land that's used for agriculture, and as a conservation organization we've recognized that we've got to work with farmers and producers if we want to keep some wildlife on some of these areas. And so this farm, we call it the demo farm. We've been trialing different things out here to try and establish wildlife populations, at the same time recognizing that farmers still got to be profitable. So the farm's still got to work. And so that's where it's been really good working with Stamps, because sometimes we have ideas and they say, yeah, that's not always the best idea. And sometimes they let us try stuff, and we've tried some things that worked and some things that haven't worked. So a couple of the species that we've kind of paid attention to out here, we've been monitoring all the species on the farm. So every spring we do a biodiversity survey, and we look at all the different species, and there's an immense number of species on the farm. There's everything. There's been elk to moose to a wasp out here, or a bee that's they've only found it south of Calgary once, I think. So there's been a whole bunch of different species out here, but we've been using pheasants because the landowner likes pheasants, and our organization released pheasants. So we've been monitoring pheasants out here and trying to figure out ways to establish pheasants. And then gray partridge is another species that we've been monitoring quite closely. So I'll kind of tell you two stories about them two species and what we've learned from them and how we've tied that into agriculture. And when we do something for one species, it benefits a whole bunch of species. So just because we're doing something for a pheasant or a partridge doesn't mean that deer and birds and everything else aren't going to benefit.
It's great for coyotes.
And there is lots of coyotes.
It's like feeding the coyotes.
Yeah. So, and as I'm going, if you guys have any questions for Nathan and I, please just ask.
So what specific species are you looking at? Anything in particular you're trying to build up, or just a general?
Gray partridge and pheasants is kind of what we tried. So our organization releases about 30,000 pheasants annually in the province. And so when we first started out here, we decided to look at different ways to release pheasants. So we had three different methods out here. One's called a hard release. So you drive out here, you let the pheasants go and see what happens. The other one's called a soft release. So you can't see it. Over on the other side, there's a little pen over there. So it's a little pen, and we put 25 pheasants in there. We leave them in there for 2 weeks. They're about 6 weeks old when we put them in. And then after 2 weeks, we slowly let 3 out each day, or 5 out. And the idea is to try and get them habituated to the area, and so they stick around. The third way of releasing pheasants is we have a big pen over here. There's 2 of them on the farm. They're 90 by about 140 feet, and they have no top on them. So we take the pheasants, we put them in there, and we clip the primaries off one wing. So they get in there, and they can't really fly. So they got to stay in the pen for a while. And then eventually the feathers start to grow back, and they can kind of fly out. And we chase them back in for the first little bit, and eventually we hope they become used to the habitat around the farm and they stay around. So the first year we did that, we put collars on them to track them, let them all go. First week was great, they kind of hung around. Second week they started kind of dispersing further, and as it went on, they all left the farm. So
Grass is always green.
we thought this is a really nice farm. There's about 70 kilometers of trees planted around here, shelter belts. We planted sorghum and millet in here as a blend. We thought, you know, it has good vertical structure. You know, there's lots of seed. So we planted that around the perimeter of a bunch of the fields. We had some alfalfa planted in with some of the grass. We figured we had everything that they needed. So the pheasants took off and we tried to find them, and I couldn't find them. We couldn't find them anywhere. So I ended up renting an airplane and going for a flight. And so we flew around, and by this time it's getting close to winter, and I ended up finding them about 17 kilometers away. So you can imagine as a pheasant, that's a straight line. So you can imagine how far they walked. And they were all in mostly, can anyone guess what they were in? Cattail marshes. So we figured out, okay, they like cattails. And so that was one of the things we learned out here was, okay, we had to establish some wetlands out here, some more wetlands. And the other thing we figured out is pheasants move a lot more than we thought if looking for stuff. So they were going up to 7 kilometers in a week. So out here, we thought, okay, we got to get some cattail marshes going. So we started working, developing some wetlands with the landowners. And it was hard to get cattails to grow. It takes a couple of years, and trying to get them established took a little bit. So we, like I mentioned, we tried sorghum and millet, and it grew well, but whenever it snowed, it would fall down, and it wouldn't stay vertical. And we wanted something that would have some vertical structure. And the other thing we found is, and Stamps helped point this out, it was hard to control weeds in, because when you start blending stuff, it's hard to find a spray that, you know, is not going to kill something. And so what we tried was Roundup Ready corn. And so we started planting corn out here. And the last couple of years, we've started releasing pheasants again, and they've all stayed on the farm. Our survival's been really good, and it's worked well. So establishing the wetlands and planting this corn, and we leave the corn standing, it's worked really well. So
what's the purpose that it has to be a vertical structure?
Thermal cover.
Okay.
So it provides, and it's shelter, but mostly thermal cover, and then it provides some food. So then the other species that we were monitoring was gray partridge. So when we started out here, so we look at the populations. We look at them every spring and every fall. So we come out here with hunting dogs, and we essentially survey the whole farm. And the numbers were going really good. In 2017, we had the highest density of gray partridge that we know of in North America on this farm. And then we had a bad winter, and the numbers started going down. And they've essentially gone down to this last fall. We had a slight increase. So we had about 9.8 partridge pairs per square kilometer last spring. And then this spring, they've actually gone up quite a bit. So since 2017, the numbers have been going down and they started going up. So we started looking at what partridge like, and we found that it was the shelter belts. So within this farm, there's, like I said, there's 70 kilometers of shelter belts, and partridge establish territories. So about every 100 feet, when it was at the highest density, there was partridge along here. And so we started looking at the shelter belts, and because we always thought, oh, we got to plant multi-row shelter belts, and it was just, all they needed was a single row, and as long as it wasn't over 2 meters tall, they'd be there. So that was one of the main things that we discovered with the partridge on the farm. But going forward, we've been trying to establish seed blends. So we've been working with Stamps and trying to find a bunch of different blends that we could plant out on the farm to essentially provide the needs of all the wildlife out here. So we've planted, we call it, it's a habitat sandwich. So we try to have some thermal cover besides some brood rearing cover, besides some nesting cover. So throughout the farm, when you look, there will be a shelter belt, and then there will be some alfalfa or some kind of forb, and then we try and have grass on one side of it too. And that essentially gives the wildlife what it needs to establish out here. And it's worked really well out here. So from a farming perspective, Nathan can anecdotally talk about a little bit about the spray that they've used out here. We put a 7 foot dirt buffer between essentially the habitat and the crop. That kind of helps establish where to spray, where not to spray, and it kind of helps keep everything straight out here. I'm not sure.
So
Yeah,
actually,
no.
before you go on, what's the ideal density for breed partridge?
I don't know what the ideal is. The highest we got it was just about 35 pairs per
Because if you get
kilometer
too
square.
high, you can run into issues, disease, all the sort of stuff too, right?
Yeah,
Just
and,
like-
and I think we would have had, that was the spring count, we had 35 pairs. I think in the fall we were just over or right around 1,000 pheasants on the whole farm, and then that's when it started to crash. And I don't know if we could have got it much higher than
Any
that.
idea why it crashed?
It was the winter.
It was the winter.
So
okay.
if you remember, the 2017 winter was very tough out here. Okay. So between the winter, and that's one of the things actually we found when we put all the wetlands in. That winter was bad, and there was a lot of water in 2018. And so that's one of the things that the wetlands really helped from a farming perspective, was it helped mitigate some of the water on the farm. So we're able to use the wetlands to buffer some of the effects of the water that was getting into the cropland and everything too. So that was a huge help from the farming perspective.
Yeah, can you guys hear me there?
Cattle in here too?
No, we haven't had any cattle in here.
No.
So we do. So when the grass gets fairly thick, we do actually go in with a mower, and we mow strips. So we don't mow a whole area. We'll mow strips and leave areas to kind of get rid of the decadent grass, and it rejuvenates it. So.
And that's also for the pheasants as well, right? In the springtime, so they have. Is that for?
Yeah. Oh, for the chicks to move too.
Yes. Yeah, the chicks to move. Yeah. So they're not walking through the tall grass, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was going to say, do the elk or do other wildlife come in here and kind of graze in some way?
You see a lot of white-tailed deer around here.
Yeah, there's tons of deer out
Like
there.
right now, if we walk through those tall trees there would be a family in there. They're all over. You just don't see them because they're in the trees typically. They don't tend to come into the crop much, but it depends if something chases them out. But typically they like to be in the shelter belts. It seems like. Is that what you've seen
Yep.
too? Yeah.
Yeah.
So does having the wildlife area kind of like keep them from going in the crops and causing any trouble, or does it attract more different species, gophers and other stuff that then come in and
Yeah,
cause
gophers
trouble?
actually stay in check pretty well on this farm compared to our other areas, but we don't border, there's farms all around us where some of our other land borders prairie and then river or whatever, and that's where you see a lot more gophers. Typically, they stay pretty well in check here.
When we do our wildlife surveys for partridge and everything, we put a dot where essentially we map it all, and essentially every dot is around the field, on the field margins of all the partridge. So they stay right along the shelter belts. Some move out into the grassland, but very few go out into the cropland.
Yeah, like when we harvest, we always start in the middle of the field, and then that is the hope that as we move outward, it chases any of the birds outward instead of trying to, working from the outside in, because you'll essentially combine them, right? So or swath them, right? So you're always trying to work inward, outward, and I think that works from what we can tell. So, but yeah, a little bit on the land, I guess. So a lot of these trees, this quarter here behind you, it's about 15 years ago, I think the first trees were planted there, or 18 years ago. I think that, and it was native prairie, this field here, that was broken. And then, we put pivot on it, and then the other ones as well. And then so it's been about 15, 16, somewhere around there, years that it's been actual in irrigation production. And like Layne was saying, we did a lot of surface drainage on these fields where instead of having a lot of, because they're fairly uneven in spots, so we would dig pretty deep in the middle. Like on this quarter here by the pivot point, we have a wetland there that was dug quite a ways down. So any of the surface runoff would go in there, and it would maintain in a smaller area but deeper, versus a wider, shallower area. And it still has a nice cattail wetland around the outside of it. And so a lot of these fields, they do drain off fairly well into the outsides, and then we pump in the spring. If it's excess water, then we'll pump them into some of these spots that can hold the water. So it's pretty nice to have that option. The ditch behind that we drove along with the bus a couple years ago, the BRD, the irrigation district, they put a pipeline in here, and then a lot of people were filling in these ditches, but we ended up the Haggins kept it, and we right now it's excess holding for spring water. If we have to pump off the fields, we'll pump water into there, and there's lots of capacity for water to be moved rather than on the field. So
how difficult was the permitting to be able to move water from wetlands to
at the
wetlands?
time, I didn't deal with that. That would have been, I believe that was my dad that dealt with that mainly at the time, and I couldn't really speak on that actually. So
It's been the biggest challenge trying to,
yeah,
you know,
there's no
they've got a net for net or
Yeah.
net loss,
yeah.
and you can't get anything but assholes telling you what you can't do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you need experts to say, hey, this will work, and then convince the regulator.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. I think more farmers would be willing to work with this if the permitting wasn't so obnoxious.
Right, yeah, and I'm sure it's getting worse in the last couple of years. A lot of the work's been done, 10 years ago plus. So and there's no drain, like it's all, there's no subsurface drainage, it's all above ground. So it's basically shaping here and there to have swales that take the water out. So in the growing season, it's great because, you're topping up your canola and it needs a lot of water right now. And the low areas aren't getting drowned out. It's, you can maintain a fairly even stand and not have the low spots fill up this time of year. So
I think there's about 40 acres worth of wetlands established on the farm. But that, and as you speak to, yeah, that's one of the issues is under pivot. I mean, it's not ideal always to have wetlands under pivot, but to try and convince someone that the wetland here moved over here,
So Nathan, as far as working with the landlord here, from an economic standpoint, I'm assuming you don't pay rent for this.
no, we only rent the irrigated acres.
So you have a landlord who obviously has some, financial wherewithal to be able to have this land and not have to worry about it getting any return from it.
Yeah, I think it's part of a long-term family goal of hunting and habitat restoration, and but yeah, it's not, if you had maybe a mixed farm, something like this could be a good fit where you'd have maybe some grazing, rotational grazing or something like that. But yeah, there's definitely a cost to it that can't be directly, paid back on it. So
that as an organization, that's one of the things we try to look at is, I guess, marginal areas. So areas that, farmers are putting inputs in, but they're not getting as much out as they're putting in.
Okay.
So for a wildlife perspective, that's what we're trying to establish out here is, there's a seed blend you can put in there that's going to actually make that a valuable wildlife area. And to the farmer, he's losing money on it, so he's better off to, put it into some habitat and not have to worry about it. So that's kind of what we've been looking at as our organization, is to try and figure out them areas and to try and sell it to producers that, that's.
I guess the question comes down to, should the farmers be responsible for the economic cost of doing this? And that's, to me, is the issue, right? Because if it's a social benefit, then it should be society that's bearing the cost, not the farmers.
Yeah, and that's one of the things going forward is right now there's not really a program in Alberta that, there's no tax breaks, there's no compensation for any of that. So when producers are doing it, they're doing it on their own or on their own dime.
And they're probably still paying tax on this stuff too.
Yeah.
Probably.
Right,
So.
so,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we've seen, we rotate our crops through here. Everything's about a 3 or 4 year rotation from, obviously canola is going to be 4 year, 5 year, and between a cereal. So we're rotating the crops, between pulses, canola, cereals, quite, every year we're switching it out, and we do that across the farm. But here we notice a lot of benefit from, I believe it's the birds and insects, just kind of the synchronization of everything around the farm that I believe helps with insect and pest spraying for insects on the farm. Last year, I believe we didn't spray one insecticide on the crops. We still use seed treatment and insecticide with seed treatment, but this year we had to. On this quarter, we had some flea beetles, and it was only on the males because the seed company used 2 different seed treatments, and the one worked on the males and the females didn't. So we had to come back and do one application early on the seed canola. But other than that, it seems like it stays in check, and you know, insects haven't been too bad this year, it seems like, on the rest of the farm, but in general this farm definitely seems to really hold up well with as far as insects go, and spraying for them. So
Even on grasshoppers?
yeah,
But I guess if you got birds and stuff around.
yeah, like grasshoppers, I haven't really seen any. In I know there's probably some as we walk here, but as far as high concentration in the field, not that I've seen. So
do pheasants and partridge eat grasshoppers?
I do, yeah. Yeah, when the chicks are born, actually about 90% of their diet is insects when they're for the first couple weeks of their life. So they're fairly important. That's why actually one of the brood rearing mixes we put forbs and legumes in it to try and attract insects, so that they can feed on them.
How about other bird species like blue jays, sparrows, crows, hawks?
Yeah, so there's been an increase in all that out here since we've done the habitat stuff. There are some species at risk out here that we found also too that have moved in.
Burrowing owls or anything like that?
We haven't found no burrowing owls yet.
I have seen owls on the property. I don't think they're burrowing owls,
No.
but
Yeah, no burrowing owls, but yeah.
There's prairie toads. I forget what they're called.
Horned toads?
Sorry?
Leopard frogs?
No, there's a toad. I know they on 36. You see them in some.
Yeah, they did find one out here. I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, they did find one.
So overall, Nathan, you think it's an economic benefit to have this in the farm?
for sure, like on our part, you know, we're not paying for the extra space, so for us to farm here, it definitely, as far as the integration, it does. It's a bit more work on our part too, to like our partnership with ACA and the landowners. You know, we all kind of work together to make their goals fit, our goals fit, and the owners' goals fit. But in the end, you know, it's definitely, I think, a win for everyone. You know, for us too. Like we're close to our main yard, so it is definitely a nice fit with what we do, and we have a good long-term relationship with the family as well. So it works well. I think it would be tough to, you know, for us, we're all seed production, and we do minimal tillage, reduced tillage, a lot of direct seeding even on these fields, and you know, I think that's a good fit with this kind of where you have some stubble in the fall. We try and leave it a little taller. We still take the straw off just for residue management, but you know, like you probably see in the stubble the pheasants will be, or the partridges will be moving through. You know, if you're aggressively tilling in the fall on these, like, I don't know if that's the best fit for what we're trying to do here, but so it's a mixture of, because we do still do a little bit of deep tillage rotationally just for hard pan and stuff like that, but yeah, our goal is kind of minimal tillage, reduced tillage. So yeah.
Any other questions or comments? If we want, we can walk over. I think there's actually some pheasants in that pen they just put in there, some 6-week-old pheasants. We can go walk over and look if anyone's interested in that. And then there's actually so this wetland, this was actually, it looked like this over there, but that's actually a fairly large wetland complex over there that we can go take a look at too if people want to go for a little walk and check things out. So yeah, I think we have to go back over there.
Yeah, we can go across
the creek. These this kind of decommissioned canal, we're trying to figure out ways to. So we've been taking willows and putting them in there. So we cut willow stakes and we've been putting them in there, trying to create that better habitat. Because with the irrigation districts putting everything underground, we're trying to establish value and leaving some of the infrastructure there. So.